We are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. We will get officially started in a little over a minute and a half. So now's your chance to run and get some coffee or water or whatever you need to do. And we'll get started here in just a minute. Thank you for being here. How's your weather over there today, Raydia? Is it?
It's good. It's a little
Yeah,
cloudy, but it hasn't started raining yet. So hopefully it holds. We'll
yeah,
see. But yeah, it's good.
good.
Yeah.
We had a little bit of rain this morning. I think they thought it was going to rain for hours, but
Oh,
it
really?
didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we just
Yeah, I've learned it's hit or miss with, weathermen. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. So yeah.
yes. And
Yeah.
I think we're sort of in the same type of weather areas where it just changes so
Yeah.
rapidly, and
Mm-hmm.
you never really know what you might get.
Right. Yeah. Here in the Midwest, it was snowing a couple weeks ago in the 20s, and now it's in the 50s. So
Yeah.
it's all over the place. But it's a
Well,
good change. It's
it
fine.
was like 72 here the other
Oh,
day.
really? Wow.
Yeah.
Where are you again? I think I forgot where.
Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. Yeah, still
Yeah, it
kind of
was.
Midwest, kind of, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. 72. I wish. I hope
Mhm.
that comes over here. We'll
I
see.
know, right? Hi, Dean. Dean is tuning in on LinkedIn. He is one of our regulars and a fellow amazing consultant here in Columbus, Ohio.
Awesome. Hello,
I say
Dee.
all the time, I think Dean knows more about nonprofit governance, regulations, IRS stuff, like all that than
Awesome.
anybody I think I've ever met. Yeah, he's
Awesome.
wonderful. So
Great
he's my
resource.
go-to. Yes,
Thanks for
yes.
tuning in, Dean. Good to, good to
And he
see you.
says hello to you too.
Thank you.
So I'm sure this will be something he's highly interested in is lobbying and regulations around that.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of IRS stuff. So
Hmm. Okay, well, it's time. Let's get started officially. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining again. Some of you are just regulars, and I so appreciate that. I hope that you find today's session helpful. I know that you will learn a lot. And so, I'm super excited to have Raydia Martin, founder and principal consultant of Advocate Impact, here today. And she's going to talk about a very hot topic among nonprofits, and lots of misunderstanding around it. And that is nonprofit lobbying as a tool for long-term systemic change. So welcome, Raydia.
thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, thank you. I'm super excited and I'm very appreciative. So thank you for spending time today.
Absolutely.
So when I asked Raydia what ideas she would bring to the coffee talk that would lead to meaningful change in the world, I loved her answer, and so I'm going to read it. I would like to encourage nonprofits to go beyond providing direct services and lobby state and local governments for policy changes that provide long-term benefits for the communities they serve. Only a fraction of the millions of nonprofits in this country lobby, which is mostly due to fears, myths, and misconceptions about nonprofit lobbying that must be addressed. Once nonprofits understand the power and the social responsibility they have to become involved in public policy, they can begin to change the systems that create the inequalities and injustices they encounter every day. I love that so much,
Thank you.
and want to put it like an exclamation point on the misunderstanding
Mhm.
and the myths, misconceptions of lobbying. This is so powerful. I really I can't think of a topic among nonprofits that's more misunderstood than
Mhm.
lobbying.
Definitely.
So thank you for spending your time today with us and helping to clarify that.
Absolutely.
A little bit about Raydia. So Raydia Martin is a lawyer and nonprofit consultant who founded Advocate Impact with a mission to help nonprofits become involved in the legislative process and push for policy changes that absolutely benefit underserved communities. She began her career, as a legislative research consultant for several national anti-human trafficking organizations, where her research was the basis for successful initiatives to strengthen human trafficking laws, promote criminal justice reform, and protect vulnerable children in the child welfare system. very noble. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Goodness, those are such important topics.
Yeah, yeah.
During her career as a consultant, she's helped numerous nonprofit organizations comply with state and federal lobbying laws, develop legislative agendas, and craft bills that best represent the interests of underserved communities. Raydia received her Juris Doctorate from Loyola University Chicago School of Law and her Master's of Social Work from Loyola University Chicago School of Social Work. It's impressive. So thank you. I feel so grateful to have you for this 30 minutes to share your wisdom and dispel a lot of myths.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you for the platform. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm Libby V, nonprofit champion and founder of Libby V and Associates. And through visioning and strategy work, leadership coaching, development support, and organizational and board development, our nonprofit leader clients successfully raise more money and have more impact. But not all of you can afford to hire a consultant. And so I created the Nonprofit Coffee Talk as a way to provide great content, great guests, and helpful information to as many nonprofit people as I can. I hope you find it useful. I always welcome your suggestions about other topics or guests, so please keep those coming. And ask questions today. Pop those questions into the chat. We'll receive them and I'll ask them of Raydia today. So please feel free to ask questions and interact a little bit. So, all right, here we go. What are some of the biggest reasons so many nonprofits are hesitant to engage in lobbying?
Yeah, so it's a number of reasons, really, but I think one of the biggest ones is that nonprofits feel that lobbying is illegal. I came from a background of working with large advocacy organizations. In fact, I started working with them right out of law school. And so when I decided to launch out on my own as a consultant, one of the first things I did was market research to kind of test the waters and see how many nonprofits would actually, benefit from my services, which at that time was helping them write legislative agendas. And so when I would write little posts like, how many of you are involved in public policy as part of your mission? A lot of them would give me, they would say, oh, a little bit here and there. But a lot of them, and I was shocked at this, would say, oh, nonprofits aren't allowed to lobby. That's illegal. We don't do that. What do you? And it's almost patronizing. It's almost condescending. And I admit I might have gotten into a couple of friendly debates, sharing resources about how we can lobby.
Yeah.
And so that was baffling to me because I came from a background of working with organizations where lobbying was their core activity.
Right.
And so I just didn't understand. But the truth is that the federal tax code does permit lobbying. And I think a lot of the fear around lobbying comes from what's called the insubstantial test. So under the original tax code, where nonprofits are allowed to engage in an insubstantial amount of lobbying, which has kind of been estimated to be around maybe 5 or 10%. But it's hard to percentify, as I like to call it, those types of activities. And so I think the fear comes from they've kind of shied away from it altogether. They said, hey, we can't really percentify our activities. We can't determine exactly how much 5% of our activities should be or are lobbying. So we're just going to stay away from it. And it kind of morphed into this myth of not being able to do it at all. But it is legal. And then I could talk a little bit later about the 501H election, which kind of makes that fear a non-issue. And again, I can discuss that later. But yeah, thinking that lobbying is illegal is definitely one of the biggest hindrances to nonprofits lobbying. The second one is that it's associated with like corruption. So I think there's this image that nonprofits go to legislators and meet with them with like a huge wad of cash and exchange it across the table and say, here, I want you to promote this law or pass this law. Here's some cash. In reality, it does look like, contributing to a legislator's reelection campaign. And it does happen. I won't sit here and be naive and say that type of illegal conduct doesn't happen. But by and large, lobbyists try to avoid any appearance of like quid pro quo interactions. They really are trying to just promote the interests of their clients. Yes, they give donations, but election laws and campaign laws are becoming a lot more strict and tighter across the nation. And so that is also nonprofits to the extent that legal bribery does exist, nonprofits can't really engage in it at all.
Right.
To donate to a legislator's reelection campaign is illegal,
Mm-hmm.
and nonprofits can lose their tax exempt status for doing that. So, where does that leave nonprofits in the big money game? It leaves them in the hands of caring public servants who really do care about nonprofit issues and are willing to help champion those issues in the federal, state, and local legislatures. And then just really quickly, a lot of nonprofits believe that lobbying is outside of their mission. And I always encourage nonprofits to think of lobbying as not an activity that's outside of their mission, but an extension of their mission. I think the nonprofit should have like a micro level mission and a macro mission. And so that's my primary, I guess, message is to think about the number of people that you could impact through lobbying, instead of focusing on like the daunting task of, or seemingly daunting task of lobbying itself. So, yeah.
That was an incredible answer, first of all. And I love that notion of a macro mission and a micro mission, right? So the micro mission is very direct, like here's what
Right.
we do, here's how we directly work with people. And the macro one, I think what you're saying is more about our communities or our, the system and really helping in that way. And I think I just was like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. I'm going to talk with people about both of those
Mm-hmm.
from now on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just as a follow-on question, I've always heard, and it is definitely illegal for nonprofits to contribute to any candidate. And I've always heard, and I think I read somewhere, and I wonder if this is accurate, that you can't even endorse a specific candidate
Mm-hmm.
publicly. And that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That is true. Yeah.
Appreciate that. And I have a question here, if you're okay if we ask it
Mm-hmm.
right now. Um, does working to change decisions by a school board count as lobbying?
So it depends on what level of government you're lobbying at. So the federal definition of lobbying does not include what's called administrative advocacy. So on the local level, a school board will be considered an administrative agency on some level. And so working to change like school board rules and regulations would not be considered lobbying on the federal level. But you're seeing more and more that state and local jurisdictions are considering administrative advocacy as a form of lobbying. And so you have to be very careful that if you're lobbying on the state or local level, that you read the reporting and registration requirements so that you won't run afoul of those requirements and possibly be fined thousands of dollars. So the answer is the traditional legal answer, which is it depends. It depends on what level of government that you're lobbying at. So.
Thank you for that. Does that help? And always ask a follow-up question if you need it,
Yeah,
okay?
definitely. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so right now we don't have any more questions in the chat, although Dean said that's a great recommendation, thinking about lobbying being an extension of the mission. I love
Mhm.
that. I love that
Thank
too.
you. Yeah.
That's great. Why is it so important for nonprofits to lobby?
Yeah, number one, it's our constitutional right under the First Amendment. We're very familiar with our freedom of religion. We're familiar with our freedom of speech. But one of the very, I guess, lesser known rights is our right to petition the government for redress of our grievances. In every phone call to a legislator, every bill proposal, every even email, which is something you have to watch out for, can be considered a petition, can be considered lobbying. And it's a right that we should not abdicate. Corporations are exercising that right. Special interest groups are exercising that right. And, we get upset with them for monopolizing the legislative process. And in many ways they do. But it's also because we don't have a seat at the table because we are misinformed. We are giving into a lot of myths and misconceptions about what lobbying is. And we are abdicating our First Amendment right to have the grievances of our communities addressed because of all these fears around lobbying. The second reason we should lobby is because it's a great source of funding, even outside of government grants. I think a lot of us are familiar with government grants, but there are whole movements. I think one of the best examples I can think of is what's called the California Can't Wait Coalition. which was formed back in 2000 or 2021, where during COVID, a group of public health advocates decided to come together and push for the legislature to provide more funding for the woefully underfunded and under-resourced public health system. And that, along with COVID, was disastrous because it didn't really have the resources it needed to really help prevent deaths and prevent treatment or provide treatment to COVID patients. And so the coalition got together, they educated legislators, they joined with corporations and even labor unions, which already had, like that the connections and the clout to help promote their lobbying initiative, which I think is very powerful. And at the end of it, they received, I think, an increase of $300 billion that the legislature decided to invest in improving the public health system in California. And so that can be, that same thing can happen at the programmatic level. It could happen on the systemic level. And so it's a great source of funding that nonprofits tend to overlook. Yeah. And then lastly, it's our social responsibility. I think every nonprofit leader should be able to envision a world where they no longer need to exist. And maybe not every nonprofit, but at least nonprofits that are human service focused. They should be able to think of or imagine a world where they don't really need to exist. That should be their macro level mission. And so I think that a lot of the underserved communities that nonprofits represent don't have the resources to advocate for themselves in the legislature. And so nonprofits that have the funding, that have the manpower, that have the connections, and have the know-how should do that on behalf of the communities they serve. So.
Wow, that was so many great points. Oh my gosh, I'm just going to put a pin in a couple of them. So absolutely, it's like, as nonprofits, to really serve our clients fully, we should be lobbying and advocating on their behalf for systems change. And that kind of rolls right into, because nonprofits can't solve all social ills on our own. We have to have the government putting systems and money in place to make that happen.
Exactly.
And so that's incredible. Like, I loved how you just said that. It's amazing. It was so much good stuff packed into those few sentences. It was incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is amazing. So what would you say are the most important steps nonprofits should take before engaging in lobbying to get ready for it?
And this is what my consulting firm, Advocate Impact, kind of focuses on, not necessarily lobbying strategy, but just giving the nonprofits the tools to lay the groundwork to just even begin lobbying, because I think that will help them overcome the hurdles to their initial fears. But one of the first things that they should focus on is adequate record keeping. Like, record keeping is like the foundation of compliance, which is where a lot of nonprofits and even corporations tend to get tripped up on and run afoul of registration, reporting, and laws and IRS regulations, is that they don't have adequate record keeping. You should be keeping track of how much time your staff spends on lobbying. You should be keeping track of direct expenses related to lobbying and also overhead costs. And so a lot of nonprofits will use timesheets, questionnaires, incident reports for organizations that don't lobby that much but want to keep track of certain lobbying incidences that they're engaging in. And so record keeping is crucial for complying with federal, state, and local law, and also taking the 501H election, which I don't think I've gotten to yet, but we can mention that. Just being able to measure their lobbying expenses or measuring their lobbying activities based on the amount of expenses. Another thing is the 501H election. So it drives me batty that nonprofits don't know about this election, because again, one of the major hurdles to nonprofits lobbying is the fear of losing their tax exempt status. And the 501H election makes that almost a non-issue. If you read the code, in section 4911, actually, which is a table of the actual amount of lobbying you can do based on your expenses. It gives you clear guidelines, gives you clear limits, clear caps for how much grassroots and direct lobbying that you can do. And so there's really no reason to be afraid of it, because the law has been given you a clear guidelines. And so I recommend that every nonprofit take the 501H election by filing a really simple tax form, Form 5768. You file it once at any time during the tax year, and it's effective, for every subsequent year after that. And then after that, you don't have to worry about, spending too much on lobbying.
Right.
And then last, but most importantly, is to know your lobbying registration and reporting requirements at the level at which you are lobbying. So again, on the federal level, there are certain activities that are considered lobbying. Administrative advocacy, for example, is not one of those activities. But as you move down to the state and local levels, administrative advocacy is considered lobbying. And so you need to calculate how much time you're spending on administrative advocacy so that you can know whether you need to report and register as a lobbyist. And so, you definitely need to go to the State Board of Ethics Commission or the state's legislative website and figure out what activities you can do that are considered lobbying, and whether you need to register and report. So
this is so incredible. This is such good information. I just put the link in for the code. So hopefully that helps. I'm just soaking it all in, and it's incredible, all the help that you're providing and guidance today. This is wonderful. So Cindy Meyer says hello, and also said, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. You can, and also said that there's a fear that lobbying would prohibit nonprofits from receiving public funding too, that's an issue. And I have a question. This is Dean's question. Does filing the Form 5768 need to be done annually?
No. So it only needs to be done once at any time during the tax year in which you decide to file it. And then it applies for every subsequent year after that until you revoke it with the exact same form. So you file it once in the current tax year, and you don't have to worry about it again. You're done. The IRS knows and has record of the fact that you're taking the 501H election. So it's simple, it's quick, and you don't have to think about it anymore. So
that's great. I'm putting the link to that in the chat too. The link to Form 5768, a one-time submission, and there are instructions, of course. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. This is great. So what are some other steps that smaller organizations can take to become involved in public policy if they don't have the funding or capacity for really doing full-blown legislative advocacy?
Right.
And I run into a lot of smaller organizations that just don't have the capacity. So this is, I think, a really great question.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that it's not conducive for every nonprofit in terms of some nonprofits have very narrowly tailored missions. And so some of them have a hard time thinking of how they can change laws or change the issue they're working on a systemic level. And I would say to them, I would say to join a coalition. The coalitions share resources all the time. A lot of them have membership fees, and all that pool of money goes towards hiring lobbyists, running grassroots campaigns, traveling to lobbying days, traveling to meet legislators. And so even if you don't have the capacity within your organization to run your own legislative initiative, contribute to coalitions that do, and partner with them, because coalitions, the most powerful and most effective legislative initiatives are those done by coalitions because of that, just that pooling of resources. And maybe you don't have adequate funding, but you have grassroots connections. Maybe you have connections with legislators. Maybe you have the capacity to do like a grassroots level study that will help provide leverage for another coalition's campaign. So there's definitely things that you can do if you don't have the capacity to do your own initiatives.
Great suggestion. Look for those membership associations that do this work, that do the lobbying and the advocacy, and they do exist. Right here in Columbus, because we have several people. So right here in Columbus, Ohio, a good example is the Human Services Chamber, and it's a membership association for nonprofit folks, and they do a lot of lobbying and legislative advocacy work. So thank you for that. That was a really great answer. Another question, what public reporting requirement is expected of the charity once the 501(h) status is declared?
So yeah, you would still need to file you would still need to file your Form 990 Schedule C, which you file the Form 990 every year to report your activities as a nonprofit. But with Schedule C, you also need to report your lobbying activities. So that taking the 501(h) election does not negate that responsibility. Um, and also, again, the federal and state and local reporting and registration requirements are still applicable to those who take the 501(h) election. So really, the reporting requirements under that election are not really different than it would be without the election. It just really the benefit with the election is to be able to have clear guidelines for how many activities you can do without jeopardizing your tax exempt status. But yeah, the reporting requirements are the same.
Good. Oh, thank you. Very helpful. And so we kind of interrupted, I think, your answer about the smaller organizations and what they can do. Is there anything else that you wanted to add about that? That the small, the steps they could take to do this work?
Yeah, really, the coalition
Yeah,
answer is like my primary answer.
good. It's a
Yeah,
smart one. Yeah,
yeah, that's
smart.
just the best. It's the best way to contribute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the collective is much stronger than
Yes.
the individual.
Absolutely.
It's
Hmm.
great. So, do you have some examples of, nonprofit lobbying initiatives that you've been part of that you want to just talk about? Because I always think that folks like to hear about, they like to hear those stories of others like them that have successfully, advocated and lobbied.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I actually have I'm in the process of writing a book about this process, and one of the chapters is just a list of nonprofit lobbying initiatives that have been highly successful to kind of encourage nonprofits and kind of send the message if they can do it, you can do it too. But one of my favorite ones was one of my first clients when I first launched Advocate Impact was a nonprofit based in Chicago that ran a free medical clinic for low income Chicagoans. I believe it was on the South Side. And the founder was a physician. And as he would treat clients or treat patients, he would hear lots of stories of a lot of his patients losing their children, very sadly, to gun violence. And so the state of Illinois had a victims compensation program where they would reimburse families for the funeral and burial expenses for burying their child. But it was putting a lot of them in debt because, yeah, reimbursement is just that. You still have to pay up front. You take out credit card debt and wait months, maybe years for compensation that may not actually come because the system as it was just marred by long waits, a lot of paperwork. It was just very, very burdensome. And so what he wanted to do is create a state funded program that would make direct payments to funeral homes and pay those funeral and burial expenses on behalf of these families. It was a completely direct upfront payment. The family didn't have to worry about it at all. There was no major paperwork. It was very quick. And so he approached me to write the bill for this new program. And he lobbied successfully, and it passed the state House and Senate unanimously in the same session that it was introduced. Um, and so that was exciting to be a part of an initiative that happened so quickly because, a lot of times, realistically, legislative initiatives can take years. You have to keep
Yes,
coming back session after session after session
yes.
for political reasons and then, change in party power. But in this particular instance, everyone was on board. It was a great bipartisan initiative and it passed. And so that was for me, being a part of that initiative was a great success for me. Um,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
wonderful. What a
Mhm.
wonderful change for
Yeah,
people.
exactly. Yeah.
That's a great example. And Radia, I would imagine that writing a bill correctly is a real skill and a
Yeah.
real niche skill. And it's wonderful to know that you do that for nonprofits, because
Mhm.
I wouldn't even know where to begin. I
Yes.
mean, I
Yeah.
might try to copy a good one that had already passed or so, follow the format or something, but
Yeah.
seems like it would be a big challenge. So
Yeah, it is a highly technical skill, but actually what you said is copying another bill. That's actually one of the starting points, is that there's no need to reinvent the
uh,
wheel.
okay.
It involves doing a lot of like research into how other states are addressing your issue, and you can take successful language from other bills and kind of craft your own bill with the language that you want, and it provides incredible leverage in the legislative process because, of course, there's negotiations with stakeholders that need to happen, but at a time when the legislature is incredibly understaffed and under resourced, providing
Yes.
your own language is very helpful because it helps the legislative council not have to do as much work. The legislative council is like the legislature's internal bill drafting attorneys, which is what I was for the state of Illinois for a while. And I can tell you that every bill that I didn't have to write was a relief. I had to check it definitely and make sure that the law was correct and that it
Sure.
didn't conflict, but not having to write it from scratch was beneficial. And also just it gives you a chance to get exactly what you want and get your
Yes.
community's best interests on paper.
And I
And
imagine it speeds that process
it
along,
does. It
right? Of
speeds it up
getting
a
it.
lot,
Yeah.
definitely.
That makes total sense. So
Mhm,
I hadn't really thought this deeply about this topic, and this was incredible. I had
mhm.
so many ahas. It's just amazing. And you are an incredible resource for nonprofits.
Thank
I
you.
put Radia's information in the chat. Reach out to her and watch for her book to be released. Her website will have that information. Um, this has been so incredibly helpful and valuable, and I am so grateful for you and your time and sharing all your wisdom with us today. We are at the end. This always happens
That was
so fast.
fast.
I say it's the fastest 30 minutes I ever spend
Yeah.
in my week, and I cannot thank you enough. I want to invite you back at some point
Absolutely.
because I know people are hungry for this information.
Mhm.
And I invite you to share anything that you want, any, whether it's a blog or whatever in the posts that it will appear on social of this coffee talk. So, I know I'm hungry for more information, and I know all the
Mhm.
nonprofit folks out there are too. So,
Yes,
thank you so
absolutely.
much,
I would
Radia,
be
for
glad to do
spending
that.
time.
Yeah, when my book
Thank
is
you.
finally released, I will post the link in
Please
the
do.
Facebook group too. So yeah,
Please,
it's a very
please do.
valuable resource.
Great, and I'll post it on my social too as a post, so,
Awesome. Thank you.
watch for that, folks. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. I hope you found this as helpful as I did, and I know that, Ann Miller commented really helpful information. So we'll
Awesome.
see you next week. My guest next week is Amanda Costura, and she's going to be talking about wellness for nonprofit folks, and I think that'll be a great topic too. So have a great week, Radia.
Thank you. And again, thank you for having me. This was a great opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next week at the same time, 11:30 Eastern time here. So thank you.